our working definition in our studies has been that, and this is, I think this reflects the general definition, should be about 10% of what's considered a recreational dose. So 10 to 20 micrograms of LSD, 0.2, 0.3 maximum grams of dried mushrooms. And this is because really we don't know what is the correct amount. So we're just kind of, for now, we're just using what people are using out in the wild. I'm not talking so much about DMT, other psychedelics, because in my surveys, people that did report using these substances a lot of time used doses that are larger than what would be considered a microdose. So a lot of people, for example, said that they smoke maybe 10 milligrams of DMT. That would for sure be perceptual. So I'm going to focus almost exclusively on LSD and psilocybin for the duration of this talk. Whenever I say microdosing, I mean these two substances. So let's start with a couple of anecdotes, just which kind of is most of what we have right now in microdosing research. And these are from my surveys. So one person said, when I microdose, I seem to be able to understand things the first time I read them much more often. Another person said, I started my microdosing experiment with psilocybin mushrooms and therein got relief from depression and alcoholism. Another person said, microdosing reduced my migraines about 80%. Amazing. These are so promising. This is so wonderful. I'm so happy that this is helping people. And at the same time, I wanted to, and my team, we wanted to study this more kind of rigorously, scientifically, and not just settle for kind of what people are saying. Now, when we started doing this was in, I think, 2017, and there was already a lot of hype and a lot of publications about psychedelics, but that trend has only increased since. So let me show you a graph. This is the amount of publications about psychedelics every year since the 1950s. So you can see that there were more and more, and then kind of the wave crashed. But then as of the 90s, there have been more and more, and the increase has just been exponential. There are so many publications about psychedelics in general, and a good chunk of them are about microdosing. And yet almost all of them are kind of surveys or analyses of what people are already doing in the wild, not so rigorous and without, I guess, tasks that measure things more accurately. Now, oh, sorry, this is from a paper that my colleagues and I published in 2020. Now, this is all good and well, and I'm happy that there's ever increasing research on psychedelics. We really need this because people are using it and there's not so much as we know about it scientifically. And so I want to actually take a detour here and talk about science more broadly for a minute, and please bear with me. Normally, this is the way we're supposed to do science. We should start with generating and specifying hypotheses, kind of say what we're going to do, what we're interested in studying. And then we design a study that would answer those questions. And then we conduct the study, we collect the data, and then we analyze the data, seeing whether our hypotheses were accurate. And then we interpret the results, kind of based on what we know about the literature, what we know about reality. And then we write a paper, publish it, and then move on to creating even more specific and more well-honed hypotheses. And that's the way it's supposed to work. However, this is not how it actually works much of the time. A lot of the time, at every turn, something could break. And harking stands for hypothesizing after results are known. This was common practice, especially in life sciences and psychology, until maybe 2010, 2011, which is when the replication crisis happened. This is not what we're here to talk about, but what I do want to say is there are serious concerns about the quality of the science we are producing in psychedelics, because psychology and life science have somewhat since moved away from all these kind of questionable research practices. But in psychedelics, people are still rushing to publish, and a lot of the research is done in ways that aren't rigorous. And so I think it's really important that we know how to kind of assess what is good science and what is not so good science. And that is extremely difficult. So, and again, not what we're here for. So let me give you a very kind of easy way to guess. Open science has been the antidote to the bad science that had happened in psychology and life sciences. The idea is that you say what you intend to do before you do it. You register it online, and then when the time comes to publish your work, you show that you did what you intended to do, and where you diverge from that, you just are honest about it. The other thing that open science encourages is sharing your materials. So if I want to study, then I tell other people how I ran my study, and they can do the same thing. And the other thing is open data. So you share your data, because when I run a study, when I run a survey on volunteers, and they give their time for free, then really that data belongs to them. It doesn't belong to me. So the least I could do is share what I have with everyone, and then anyone can look at my data and do whatever they want with it. So this has been my approach since my first survey, and it is still the case. And you'll see on some of my slides, it'll have this pre-registered logo. But every single hypothesis, everything I've done is pre-registered, and I encourage you to look for that in other people's work as well. Now, going back to the actual studies that I ran. So what we did was the first one was a survey that we posted on social media. This is back when Twitter was Twitter, before it was X, Reddit, Facebook, other social media. And we just had about 30 minutes of questions for people. So the results from this study, first of all, we had about 1,400 participants, which was a good amount. We felt good about that. As you can see, the breakdown is preferentially of a certain type of person. Initially, I was taken aback by this and with some dismay, but apparently this actually represents the makeup of Reddit reasonably well. So at least we kind of know, and it's very important to be cautious. Everything I'm going to tell you about at least this study, we can infer not to humans on Earth and elsewhere, we can infer this to people of Reddit. So take it with a grain of salt. We asked people what if they dose and when. So we had 4 groups. We had people that said that they're currently microdosing. We have people that said that they're not currently microdosing, but have microdosed. We have people that said that they have not microdosed yet, but are interested in microdosing. And then we had a small additional kind of control sample of people who are just not interested, but were willing to fill out the survey anyway. So what we have through this is kind of even though this was a cross-sectional design where we only asked people one time, we do have kind of a pseudo pre-post design. So we can say, well, if people are different, we can see whether it's because of their attitudes towards psychedelics or microdosing, or if it's maybe because of the practice. Not for sure, because again, this is cross-sectional, this is a survey, this is on Reddit, a lot of caveats. What were people using? By and large, people use LSD or at least used LSD to microdose, and then mushrooms were less popular. Notice that out of the others, a big chunk was other lysergamides, like 1P-LSD, which is very similar to LSD, and another good chunk was psilocybin, which is it's another molecule that exists in magic mushrooms. We also asked people how frequently they microdose, and we found predictably that most people microdose 1 day on, 2 days off, kind of Fadiman protocol. But we also found another bump there, people who microdose roughly every week, which we found pretty interesting. I'm not going to explain that finding, and if someone wants to talk about it at the end of the talk, we can do that. Now, the next thing we did was we asked people, what are the 3 main benefits and 3 main drawbacks that you experience from microdosing? So by far, the most common benefit was improved mood, and that was followed by improved focus and then creativity. Everything here is kind of what you'd expect. Social benefits were kind of surprising to me. But yeah, that's all great. We also asked about the drawbacks because we want to be even-handed. In this survey, the most common drawback was illegality, which is not an issue with a substance, it's an issue with public policy. But then physiological discomfort was quite common too. That includes stuff like GI discomfort, feeling hot and cold, having trouble sleeping, stuff like that. And then other is not very descriptive, but it's stuff like, I wish there was more science about it because I don't know if I'm doing it right. I don't know if it's interacting with my prescription drugs. There were a lot of concerns. Now, those of you who have either seen the slide before or are shrewd, you may notice that these sometimes mirror each other. Like people reported reduced anxiety, but also increased anxiety. People reported improved focus, but also impaired focus. That's very interesting. If you want, someone can ask me about it at the end and we can chat about it more. Now, our quantitative findings. We found that people generally reported that they, this is a bit of a confusing slide. So people use less tobacco, less psychiatric medication, less illicit substances, cannabis, caffeine, alcohol, and reported improvement in anxiety, eating habits, exercise, and you can see the mood being an outlier there. A lot of mood improvement. Almost everyone reported that their mood improved. Now, these were all exploratory, so we didn't pre-register these, and now these are the pre-registered hypotheses. So we thought that people will report that microdosers, will show lower negative emotionality. And this is indeed what we found. And so good, that's great. We also hypothesized that people who microdose will be more open-minded. And remember, this is why we also had the sample of people who said they wanted to microdose but haven't microdosed yet. So we can really compare. Is it about kind of their predisposition to microdose, or is it perhaps an outcome of microdosing? And so we found, again, that there was a significant difference. Microdosers were higher in open-mindedness. We also hypothesized that they would be lower in dysfunctional attitudes, which we also found to be the case. We hypothesized that they would be higher on wisdom, which is a very tricky thing to define. I would never attempt such a thing, but there is a scale to measure wisdom, and indeed we found that microdosers were also higher on wisdom. And finally, creativity. We actually used a task for this. We didn't just ask people, are you creative? We used a task called the unusual uses task, which asks people to think of as many creative uses for a household item as possible in a limited amount of time. And then these were independently rated on 3 dimensions by people who didn't know who microdosed and who didn't. And we found that people who microdosed were also more creative. So this is mind-blowing. This is not how science is supposed to work. You're supposed to be kind of, to have some of your hypotheses falsified, and that should inform what you do next. It just happened that everything was a hit. This is not because we're so smart or successful. It just happened to be the case. So good. Based on this study, we can say, maybe there's something there. Now, what's necessary after you run a study is you need to replicate it. You need to get the same results again to say that these weren't flukes. And so a couple of years after this, we worked with a global drug survey and added some questions to their survey. So there were 123,000 participants, I guess 124,000 in every single country on Earth, every territory pretty much. And so we asked people what they microdose. It was a similar trend, mostly LSD. And then we also asked people why they microdose. And so this is not the greatest slide. Sorry about that. It mostly replicated our findings from before. So this chunk is to improve mood. But then we added something that we were like, maybe there's something there. We added another option, which was just curious. And you know what? A lot of people were just curious. Roughly the same amount of people were just curious as the people who were doing it to improve mood. So this was surprising and interesting. A lot of people, I think it's because there's such a hype. A lot of people were trying it just because they were curious. All right. And then we also, sorry, this is for psilocybin. LSD, very similar trend, mostly for to improve mood and somewhat just curious. And then there's all the others. Now, okay, so we were mostly able to replicate our results. Good. There are a bunch of things that we didn't ask because the global drug survey is very long and we didn't want to overwhelm people. So I think it's also important to note what other people have found in the literature. So overall, like you can see, some of these are randomized control trials. Some of these are surveys, but you can see people have found kind of higher unity and bliss, heightened states, improvements in depression, anxiety, memory, or at least that's what people are reporting. There's another one of these, another more online surveys mostly. Notice that the RCTs kind of didn't find a lot of significant findings, like Bershad et al., Family et al., and here Yanakieva et al. No significant findings. That tells us something. But a lot of the online surveys, yeah, they found kind of the same results over and over again: improved mood, improved cognitive functioning, improved creativity. Great. This is all very, very exciting. And so overall, the findings appear to converge. It looks like microdosing has no significant acute negative effects. That is very important and maybe hasn't really been discussed in any of these studies so much. I think it's important to stop and say that because sometimes there's an acute negative effect and that should be considered. Notice that I say acute. The reason I say acute is because, as some of you may have heard, there are real concerns right now about potential chronic negative effects of microdosing. It might be cardiotoxic. This is a very reasonable concern. There's no research on it yet, and people who microdose should be cautious about it. And if you microdose frequently, take breaks, let your heart heal, maybe. The other finding that repeats itself is, great, microdosing seems to really improve mood and creativity. Now, this is more in the surveys, not so much in trials, but this appears to be pretty consistent. So that's great, very exciting and encouraging. Now, the next step after, at least for me, after having run these surveys, is I want to run an actual lab study. I want to run a clinical trial. And that's what we're doing right now. So this is our design. This is maybe a lot to take in one go. The way it works is that we have two groups. Group one starts the study on placebo. And they have placebo for, sorry, let me take a step back. The whole study is 8 weeks. And we only do it on Saturdays. The reason we only do it on Saturdays is because as you saw the demographic breakdown of our Reddit sample, that actually, to some extent, reflects the overall demographics of psychedelic studies. Everyone or many people in those studies kind of look like me. And I think that we should, if we want to say about whether these substances work for people in general, we should have kind of people in general in these studies. And so we're running it once a week on the weekend. And the idea is, a lot of people have jobs, and if we had done it during the week, a lot of people with jobs, excuse me, couldn't attend. And we want people who really are real people. And so the way it works is that, like I was saying, people that are in the first group come in and they start with placebo for 4 weeks. The other group starts with psilocybin for 4 weeks. All this is once a week, double blinded. We don't know what they're getting. They don't know what they're getting. And then after 4 weeks, everyone switches over to what's called open label. So everyone knows that they're taking psilocybin. This is a very small dose. Everyone's taking 2 milligrams of psilocybin, which roughly translates to 200 milligrams of dry mushroom. And then, because mood was such an overwhelmingly common response in our surveys, we want to see whether it affects mood. Originally, the intention was to actually run this on a non-clinical sample, but when I started this process with Health Canada, they were very concerned about how toxic and dangerous these substances are. And they said that people who can't benefit from it clinically, it's not worth the risk. Excuse me. So instead, And I think this is sensible to some extent. This is as far as they're concerned, this is a new experimental drug. So we decided to go with a sample of people with major depressive disorder. We want to see if it will improve their mood. But in addition, there are a bunch of other things that we want to measure because we've found them time and time again in our work. Others have found them. So we don't want to just see whether microdosing affects mood. We want to see if it affects engagement, mindfulness, anxiety, creativity, cognitive function. So really there's a lot that we're measuring. And we really want to see whether microdosing does anything at all. Of course, all of our hypotheses, everything is going to be pre-registered. And I'm very excited to say that we just last week or the week before finished running our first cohort. And already just, this is qualitative. This is not kind of a scientific analysis. Some of the people that came in were pretty depressed when we started, and they halfway through the study, they already started feeling better. Now, I don't know if they were on psilocybin or placebo, but maybe there's something there. I personally am feeling very excited about it now, a lot more than I was. Had I given this talk a year ago, I think I would have been a lot more disillusioned about the potential in microdosing. But having kind of seen the way people responded, especially in the open label part, where people knew that they were dosed, was extremely interesting. So yeah, I do want to say this study is funded by donations, and we're pretty low on cash. So if you or someone you know are wealthy enough to donate and are interested, I would love to chat with you more. Please feel free to reach out. So yeah, that's kind of my talk. You can find more on our work on this OSF link. That's the Open Science Framework. You're more than welcome to check out our website, psychedelicscience.ca. Please email me, rotem@petranker.com. Yeah, and thanks very much for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was great. We do have one question in the chat from Stephanie, so I'm going to read that out now. Was there any exclusionary criteria in the first study, for example, people with existing mental health diagnoses?
No, I think the only thing we asked is whether people, oh, right, thank you. And MAPS Canada is we've partnered with MAPS Canada. And I'm very thankful for that. I'm very happy about it. We posted the first survey on multiple subreddits and other social media. And we didn't even care if people were microdosing because we needed a subsample, people who have never microdosed and are not interested in it. One of the papers that we produced from that survey is what comorbidities we found. And by and large, I haven't looked at that paper in a few years, but I think that anxiety maybe was more common. But you know what? Please email me. I will email you the paper. You can kind of see everything. But that's a great question.
Perfect. So Heather just popped in a question. What psilocybin strains are you using? And what is your opinion about the strain choice in microdosing?
That is a great question. I don't know what strain I'm using. What I'm using is a botanical extract that's being produced by a company called Filament Health out of BC. They've been great to work with. And I've learned much from working with them. I guess, so if you look on Wikipedia, you'll see that the difference in psilocybin content between different strains ranges from, I think, 0.5% to 1.9%. So it's not a huge difference. Whereas if you, I guess, this has been known for a long time in the scientific literature, but it has not been translated well enough to the general population. And honestly, many scientists don't know this either. The difference in the amount of psilocybin in the same fruiting body, in the same mushroom, you could have one piece of the mushroom having 500% more psilocybin than another part of the mushroom. So I'm not sure that it matters a whole lot which kind of mushroom you use. or if if you use the cap or the stem, I think it's a lot more important to correctly analyze the fruiting body or whatever part it is that you're using, and then create a homogeneous mixture of mushroom so that you can dose accurately. This is, by the way, I think a big part of the reason why people microdose with LSD and not with psilocybin. Like when you take just a little piece of a mushroom, you never know exactly what you're going to get, and then a lot of people have surprise trips, which is kind of unpleasant. Whereas with LSD, if you use a volumetric method, it's a lot easier to accurately dose.
Great. Carrie asked, any updates on Health Canada that you've seen in studies that look promising for legal use in Canada?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that, but I'm just going to look at the chat. I am not the right person to ask. I don't know. I mean, in terms of, I'm trying to think in terms of my colleagues that are working on these things. There's, I think, the ongoing citizen science effort from BC, Zach Walsh and others, but that's a survey. I know that Apex Labs they have some things going on, but I don't exactly know what. Yeah, sorry, I really don't have a good answer for this question.
No worries. Awesome. So I think we have some hands up. I think, are we able to unmute them at all for?
I think everyone should have the ability to unmute. I think Felipe's hand was up first.
Yep.
Hey, thank you so much, and thanks for the great presentation. I really appreciate this research. We ran the Canadian Psychedelic Survey last year, myself and colleagues, and we got over 2,300 respondents. We haven't published the microdosing data, and I'd love to talk to you about that because we're looking for someone interested in microdosing who'd like to write it up. But we did find overwhelmingly that Canadians in that survey said that they microdose using psilocybin. In fact, the numbers for past year microdosing was 83%, and for lifetime about 81%, compared to LSD, which was well below 30%. So I'm really curious about your data set suggesting that most people who are microdosing are using LSD. We just ran the global psychedelic survey and asked internationally. We did see higher rates of LSD in the EU and also Australia and New Zealand, but it still didn't dwarf the amount of people using psilocybin for both micro and macro use. Any sense as to why our data might be different?
Absolutely. Well, hey, thank you so much for introducing yourself. That's really, I didn't know that you ran that survey, and I would love to chat more. I think to me, what jumps out, and I might be wrong, but the thing that seems most likely is that psilocybin is, well, not literally, it is effectively legalized in Canada, whereas LSD isn't. So people like in Toronto and Vancouver and many, like I think most big cities in Canada now have at least one dispensary where you could just go in, buy some mushrooms and leave. And I think that purchasing experience speaks deeply to the average Canadian, whereas buying from the black market, like remember my illegality was kind of the most common drawback in my first survey. No one wants to buy from a drug dealer. So that would be my assumption. And I think that is somewhat supported by specifically the kind of countries you named. I wonder if we ran another survey kind of now or starting in a few months in Australia, if the picture will be a lot more similar to the way it is in Canada.
Yeah, the survey, the global psychedelic survey we ran was just this last May, and we're still seeing higher uses of psilocybin. I don't want to take up any more time. There's other folks who want to have questions, but I'd love to be in touch. So I'll reach out today or tomorrow and love to hear more about your study. Thanks so much for the great presentation.
Thank you so much, Philippe, and thank you for the introduction. That is really cool to hear that you guys are making a connection and that you ran a large-scale study in Canada about microdosing and psychedelic use. Lucas?
Hey, thanks so much for the really great presentation and for all the great research as well. Really excited to see how this is moving forward. My question is kind of a neuroscience question, but it's really kind of about mechanisms. How should we interpret the effects that you're getting in your study in light of what we know about macrodoses. So, like, if we have it's a pretty good. I'm thinking mainly of the Rebus model, which was kind of the main attempt at a kind of universal theory of how these drugs are operating in the brain. How much of our understanding of how that works or interacts with major depressive disorder or other disorders can we translate over to the microdosing context? So is it what of those theories that we know about how these drugs work in the brain at high doses can just be translated over to the low dose situation? Does that question make sense?
Sure. I think that if you read the original Rebus model paper, it says that microdosing shouldn't and can't work. And that may be the case. I am not a microdosing evangelist. I can live perfectly well with if it turns out that it does nothing. So I think this is why it blew me away the first time I read the Rebus model paper, because I was like, this is so you're kind of unnecessarily making yourself vulnerable by saying no way microdosing works. So yeah, I mean, I guess my response is a lot more pragmatic. We know large doses work, no doubt. By this point, we know that. What exactly we mean by work is a whole other can of worms, but they do something. They're somewhat effective for some things. Now, the question is, what is the minimal dose that is effective? So if it's not my dose, if it's not 2 milligrams, maybe it's 3, maybe 4, maybe 5. Maybe it turns out that we need to have a full-blown trip to get the benefits, but maybe not. So I'm not ready to commit to any position on this. I mean, the science is still nascent and we need a lot more empirical data before we can make any such sweep generalizations. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm thinking kind of more from a predictive processing point of view when they have this kind of theory about what's happening at a perceptual level, and if we can just kind of view the microdosing neuroscience in the same light. I don't actually know if it's an answerable question, really. I'm just curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know is the answer.
I don't either.
Yeah, but it's an exciting thing to think about for sure. And I mean, honestly, the more data we collect, the more we'll be able to answer these questions. My intuition is that microdosing doesn't work. As microdosing as we have defined it as I mean, not in my presentation because I was trying to be more quantitative. Microdosing as we have defined it as kind of a culture that is subperceptual dose. I think it doesn't work. I think what really happens is that people that are reporting that they're microdosing, they're actually taking just like a museum dose. They're feeling it a little bit, and that is the effective dose. That would be my bet.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely a tough question to answer, but interesting insights there. I think we have a ton of questions in the chat here, so I'm just going to kind of get started. Stephanie asks, can you talk a bit more about the potential of expectancy bias, kind of referring to the positive results in the current study?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that there is a ton of work on that. I published a couple of papers with colleagues discussing it from a theoretical perspective. I think that no one has actually examined it empirically, though. Maybe the exception would be Balas Shigeti, who has looked at it a little bit, but only in his own kind of data set. And I think what we need to do is to collaborate and then try and apply the same mathematical modeling that he has for others. And I really respect that he chose, for his model, he chose something very, very conservative. And so kind of when he did that, when he controlled for expectancy, he found that there's no effect. But I think this is because his model is so conservative. I have not had a chance to try that myself and use less conservative assumptions. in our microdosing trial, we're trying to some extent to control for expectancy. So before people start, we ask them what they think is going to happen, what they've heard about psychedelics, and then during the study, every study day, we ask them if they think that they're on placebo or psilocybin, why they think that, what they're experiencing, a lot of qualitative questions. And the other thing is that more quantitatively, we're going to model how much people improve in the first half of the study when they're blinded, and then compare it to how much they improve in the second half of the study when they know that they're on psilocybin. And so if people were on psilocybin the first half and did not improve and then improved on the second half, that's expectancy. There could be a bunch of other outcomes. This becomes very tricky to talk about because you just need to create a table because it's hard to keep it all in mind. But yeah, expectancy likely to be huge, rarely discussed. I think it's akin to set and setting, which is also rarely discussed in microdosing trials and studies, which is, I think, also very important. For sure, something huge to keep following.
Thank you.
Awesome. I see Chelsea with her hand up. I think we'll just take hers, I guess, prior to the chat. So if you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, hi. Awesome. I'm so happy to be able to be a part of this and listen about the study. I'm just wondering, from an average Canadian's perspective, what can we do to help this? I call it a movement because I am a firm believer in microdosing and its effects. And I would really like to help this in any way possible. I'm not in the medical field, but I am so incredibly interested in this. And I really feel that people need to be more involved, whether it's writing Health Canada, their members of parliament, working with their, nurse practitioner or doctor. How can we help this become more mainstream and more accepted?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's so many ways. You already mentioned a few important ones. For sure, writing to your MP or MPP. Those are people with more power than us. I'm going to assume that MAPS Canada always needs more people. So you could always volunteer with them. They have a way of doing things.
Okay.
There are if you want, you can email me. I can maybe suggest some organizations that are already working in the area.
That would be fantastic because I do look on the MAPS website. I'm in Ontario, so like a lot of this goes on in Western Canada. So I'm trying to find things more in my region. There is some stuff in Toronto. I have reached out to some places down there. But I really, really, really want to help this as much as I can. I really, truly believe in this. And I look on the MAPS website, but it's just trying to figure out what courses to register and what to do and how to help and stuff like that. It's difficult to navigate. So yeah, I will definitely email you. That would be fantastic.
Great. Thanks.
Cool.
Lots of connections that's happening, it seems, which is great. All right, so continuing with the chat here. For some reason, it's glitching a bit, but I'm going to pull up what I could. I think, Eric, are you able to see one? If for some reason it's not cooperating with me.
Yes, here. So Nikita asks if any data is collected around lifestyle change during the day of dosing, so whether they might engage in healthier activities.
No, not acutely during so the day that they're dosing, they spend the whole day in the clinic. They can't leave because we're not even sure that they're sober. So we're trying to be very, very cautious. Overall, absolutely. We ask a lot of these questions about their health behaviors. Because we really believe there will be these differences based on our previous surveys. So we ask about sleep, nutrition, exercise. Yeah, absolutely.
And then some other questions.
And did you notice any differences? Oh, you got it.
I think I caught the question. We haven't analyzed any of the data yet. There's the first cohort. All I'm saying about the first cohort is stuff that these people have told me. I've not looked at any of the data that they've filled out.
Some points of clarification for the first survey study. Where was the study population?
Global. There was, I think, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think there were a lot of Canadians. There was a surprisingly large representation from Norway. Our signal got boosted by, I don't remember the name of the organization, some charity in Norway that is dedicated to the promotion of psychedelics. Yeah, but kind of a lot from North America and Western Europe.
And then another question, Riel wanted to know if there was a washout period between the two halves of the study in the clinical trial.
There isn't, because we didn't know how long it would take, because there isn't enough clinical data. The washout, which I actually didn't discuss in my presentation because I didn't want to overwhelm everyone with information, the washout comes at the end. So after the 8 weeks, we continue to follow up with people for initially 4 weeks, where we check in every week with some surveys to see how they're doing. And then if people sign up, we follow up with them for 2 more years, kind of long-term follow-up to see how they're doing. Personally, I very much doubt that 8 weeks of microdosing is going to affect anyone for 2 years, but hey, life is full of surprises, and why not follow up with people?
Yeah, I'll be really excited to see when that long-term data comes out. My sort of question, like just coming from me, you brought up that in your survey, there was a bump in the graph of people who are dosing once a week. And I was wondering if that relates to your decision in the clinical trial to dose once a week.
Yeah, so partly yes, although to be honest, by far the most important reason was pragmatics. I wanted real people. And also I feel like we have an ethical commitment to, like, if this thing works, people should have access to it, not just people who can take a day off every week for 8 weeks straight. But yes, my thinking was, if a bunch of people are doing it weekly anyway, and they're getting benefit from it, sufficient benefit that they continue to do it weekly, then maybe there's something there, and we should be looking into that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Esme, do you think I missed any questions in the chat?
From what I can see, I think you got them all. I think just to finish off, the one thing we left unsaid, and I'm curious, the two sides of the coin when it comes to the microdosing experience. And we saw that on the 2 graphs there. So we saw increased anxiety, decreased anxiety with those 2 experiences. So I'm wondering, and amongst other experiences, so I'm wondering what your take is on that, if you have any.
Yeah, I wrote a paper about that. If anyone's interested, just email me and I'll send you the paper. I think that it's set and setting. I think that nobody talks about set and setting and microdosing, and it's unfortunate because it's kind of a thing, regardless of drugs. Set and setting is really important for any activity we do. So if I had to guess, I think that if you microdose on a Tuesday and go into work and sit in your cubicle under the fluorescent lights and work for 8 hours, you're gonna have one kind of experience. And if you microdose on a Saturday and go on a walk and come back and do some art and read a book and listen to music, you're gonna have another kind of experience. Thanks, Nikita. Oh, I'm sorry, you have to pay money to access it. Well, yeah, people can see it, and then if you want to read the actual paper, please email me.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You know, you kind of think about it with these larger experiences with psychedelics, but not the micro ones. So it's interesting to kind of shift that narrative and apply it there. So
yeah,
very interesting.
I will say that I recently wrote a review. It'll hopefully soon be published in a few weeks. And out of, I think, something like 16 papers that I reviewed that were all microdosing studies, only 2 mentioned set and setting, even in passing. So it's a thing that's just not discussed.
Very interesting. All right.
Great question. How will set and setting impact my study? So first of all, we tried to make it consistent. Second, we've made it explicit. So our study is being run out of a pediatric clinic. So it's kind of a nice, pleasant atmosphere. It's not like a hospital setting. There's a bunch of like inspirational writing on the wall, animals, or like, animal figures, bright colors. We are trying to let people go on walks as much as we can. If we're in doubt that they're sober, someone goes on a walk with them. So while I think this is not the perfect solution, it's important to remember that when you do research, some of the time it's like you either increase ecological validity by talking to people and seeing what they do in real life, or you increase internal validity by minimizing the variance in people's conditions so that you have kind of something very consistent. In our case, we're going for the latter. So we're just trying to keep it so that everyone has the same set and setting. We check in with people, how they're doing, making sure that their set is as consistent as possible. A lot of it really can't be controlled.
Great. Great discussion. I think that is it. The questions kind of slowed down. We are nearing the hour. I think that was really great. Thank you again for your time and everyone's attendance. We had a great turnout and everyone's engagement was really appreciated. And just so you know, too, next month we will be planning near the end to have another webinar as well. So feel free to send in your recommendations if you want to hear and register as well for updates and whatnot, and keep in touch with our Instagram and everything like that. Do you want to share anything else before we head off or with the crowd?
Oh, let me write my email address on the chat. It's rotem@petranker.com. That's my name. Thanks very much, everyone. This was really fun, and thanks for the very thoughtful questions. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Rotem.